Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. We're going to have a great show today. Ashley Edwards from the Business Council is going to join me here shortly. But I wanted to share something with you. I got a call from Todd Trenchard from the Baker McCarty Foundation. They're a major sponsor, incidentally, this year, the One Coast Awards. Used to be the top 10 leaders, top 10 community leaders, and then the top 10 under 40 leaders at the Sun Herald. But along the way, the Sun Herald sort of handed this off to the regional chambers or the chambers along the coast, and they continue to move it forward. And they're doing such a great job. The new name of it is the One Coast Awards. Todd wanted me to consider being sort of the opening speaker and just to welcome everybody and sort of place a challenge, so to speak. And I'm really excited about the opportunity. I was honored to start the awards back in, I think, 2002. We started the conversation when I became publisher in 2001. And I'm so glad that it's still going, because at the end of the day, the leadership in coastal Mississippi, that's going to be our key to reaching our potential as a region. So it got to me thinking. I've been thinking a lot about it. I certainly have an opportunity to think about it every day on Coast Vue. But I was reading a book summary of a book written by Brene Brown called Daring Greatly. And in the book, she said, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is a sign of strength, not weakness. Think about it. So allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is a sign of strength, not weakness. And I got to thinking about it. I really can't agree more. I mean, if you think about it, for example, to be vulnerable is to be honest about where you may be underperforming, personally. And that the focus on that is going to make you want to be thirsty to be better, to improve yourself. And because, we all know that to succeed in our life, we have to be committed to constant improvement. And so, this applies to us individually, of course, but it also applies to how we should approach our region, coastal Mississippi. It's important work for all of us who live, work, and play here. That's for sure. It's important work for the people who visit here. It's obviously incredibly important to the state, because we are the economic engine that drives the state of Mississippi. So it's been said many times before, so goes coastal Mississippi, so goes Mississippi. And that's just literally a fact. So coming back to this notion of vulnerability and being a strength, not a weakness, we've got to be willing to be vulnerable as a region, and in order to ultimately get stronger. So overcoming our challenges is an imperative if reaching our bigger dreams for the region is really important to us. So do you see the connection? Do you see the connection between bigger dreams and being vulnerable? So what is really possible here in coastal Mississippi? I believe more is possible in this region than we could actually ever imagine. But are we really aligned around what is possible? I believe to my core that there is no way we can get to where we ultimately want to go in this region if we don't have real alignment around where we are now. So where are we vulnerable? And alignment is actually a really important point here, by the way. Once we know what the vulnerabilities are, is there alignment around those vulnerabilities? Do we collectively as a region see being vulnerable as a necessary ingredient of being stronger? I think there's a lot of work to be done here, to be honest with you. Too many people who can make a difference are just too satisfied with where we are now. In fact, some protect the status quo with a vengeance. I can tell you that. As publisher, I saw it after Katrina. And too many of them, unfortunately, are elected officials. They're not all elected officials, but too many elected officials focus a little bit too much on protecting the status quo. So we have to know to the best of our abilities what our challenges are. And we have to be boldly thinking about dreaming bigger than we've ever done before. Only when we can get better aligned around the gaps that exist from where we are now in our current situation in coastal Mississippi and where we want to be, with bold dreams inspiring us to dream bigger, and with amazing leadership, only can we be really working to get better. At a very high level, all of this makes incredible sense. But it's extremely hard work. Believe me, finding agreement and getting alignment, not just in where we're vulnerable, but also what the possibilities are. This is really, really hard. Now, I've had over 600 shows here on Coast Vue in more than 2 years. I am convinced we have the talent. I know that we have leaders with vision, and we have people with the ability to contribute toward those visions financially. But we also have great leadership. And I believe that in that way, if we bring it all together and we're smart about it, that we are gifted actually in this way. But we're not aligned too often. Okay, that's just a fact. We expect too little too often from elected officials. We too often let the gravity of mediocrity weight us down. This keeps us from dreaming bigger, and it zaps our collective energy in our region. Then complacency starts to set in, and complacency is our enemy. I could say a lot more like that at this breakfast that I'm going to be attending, but I'm trying to think about, it's going to be a theme, something like that, that complacency is probably our biggest challenge as a region. And we need people to dream big, and we need to be honest about what our challenges are. We're fortunate here to have chambers of commerce across the coast that are very strong. We've got a good community foundation. We've got a thriving nonprofit community, and we've got a strong business council, a regional business council. And with all that said, I want to turn to my friend Ashley Edwards, who's the president and CEO of the Business Council. Ashley, we've talked in these terms many times before. But when I read this summary of Brena Brown's book, and where she said that vulnerability gives us a strength, do you sense that, if you just, we're talking more generally here because we're a collection of communities that make up this larger coastal region. But do you sense that we're truly aware of how being vulnerable actually makes us stronger?
No, I don't think so. I think we suffer a lot from sort of this broader disease of not being able to talk about our problems and our shortcomings, because it's often, I guess, viewed as criticism. And we have I think part of it's cultural too. We have a culture here that says, never. If you're not going to say anything nice, don't say anything at all, kind of a thing. And criticism is not usually taken in the constructive way it's meant. And so I don't think we're at that point yet, honestly. I think it's been very difficult, and in some ways it probably doesn't help us that we've gone through so many disasters that weren't of our own making, because it's allowed us to be victims. And that's not to say that we weren't victims. We were victims of things that were outside of our control. But at some point we have to stop sort of playing the hand that's been dealt, and start trying to earn a better hand.
And I think the role leadership plays in that is really important. And of course, the Business Council is in a position to sort of look at things from a regional point of view, to really do a lot of current process analysis, a lot of situational analysis, and a lot of, and at least begin conversations about what is possible. But leadership's the key. And I think, the investments that so many are making in leadership development, the awards, the One Coast Awards are important. I always said from the very beginning about that. When I called people to say that you won the award this year, I said it to every single one of them that when Haley Barbour and I, at the time Haley was the governor, was there to award them the award, I was so happy that they were enabling us to hold them up as an example, so that we can inspire other people to want to lead in the way that they lead. But it takes a lot of leaders. It takes more than we probably have right now that are focused on this. And that's why we got to stay focused on it. We got to stay focused on bringing as many leaders into the fold as we possibly can. And one of the things that gives me as you know, it gives me a lot of hope, Ashley, and I said it just a second ago, and I do think we're gifted in that there are emerging in coastal Mississippi a whole new cadre of leaders and entrepreneurs and those that don't let much grass grow under their feet. They're focused on, they're making some of these men and women are making investments in the multiple millions of dollars in coastal Mississippi. And so they're not just being a leader, saying, okay, how can I contribute to my volunteer effort to help bring focus on this? They are investing millions and millions of their own money because they believe in a future for coastal Mississippi that is extraordinarily compelling. And, that's actually really important. But when we come back, I want to continue the conversation with Ashley about leadership, the role that leadership plays. I've had some big concerns about the Gulf Coast Restoration Fund, the money, and how the money is being used and whether it's actually being used or not. And I want to kind of dive into that. That's actually really important to our goals, and I'll explain more to you why this is important in a minute. But when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We have Ashley Edwards, the president and CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council. He's been a great friend of the show and someone I talk to regularly because the more I do this show, the more I want to raise the bar. And it's hard to raise the bar if you don't have consensus. And one of the things, Ashley, when I was in the media business, and one of the reasons why my career did really well as I got further in my career was because I had the opportunity, kind of as a young up-and-comer in Knight Ridder, the company that owned the Sun Herald, to be involved with some of the best consultants, some of the most, influential consultants in the world as it relates to re-engineering and cultural change and all of that. So I just spent a lot of time with some incredible teachers. And what I learned is, and I've said this recently about the income tax situation, but specifically that when you want to bring about change, whether it be legislative change or bringing people together in a region or whatever it is, you got to have a roadmap. And you have to, and all the stakeholders have to be sort of on board with the roadmap. And it doesn't mean, so the roadmap isn't getting into process. It's not getting into content. It's not getting into strengths and weaknesses and none of that. The roadmap is simply, here is the process we're going to deploy to help us get from where we are now to where we want to go. And having a roadmap we could all agree to was really, really important. If you don't have a roadmap, then you're not speaking the same language when you talk about change. You're not in agreement about what are the data points that we're going to use that are going to define whether we're successful or not. You don't have a shared vision about where you're headed. What great leaders do is they paint a vision for the future and get people excited, and then they define an orderly process to help us tactically get from here to where we want to go. We don't really have that yet in coastal Mississippi, where there's this kind of common roadmap that brings everybody into the conversation on the same page. Do we?
No, we don't have that. In fact, we've never really had it. I've been spending a lot of time lately reflecting back on the 20 years that I've been here on the coast, and I particularly think about the years after Hurricane Katrina, and I think maybe you and I have talked about this before, but I remember it so well. We were dealing with $5.5 billion of federal supplemental recovery money that had been appropriated by Congress to the state of Mississippi, and we were working to create first of their kind programs at that time to try to figure out how to spend that money to ensure that our communities would be able to recover. And one of the things that we looked at doing, for example, was actually paying for the cities and the counties to bring in world-class planners, land use planners, architects, engineers, others that could help them determine how best to rebuild their city, and actually bring those folks in and hire them on a contract, whether it be a year, 2 years, 3 years as city employees. And I remember as we were sitting around the office working on trying to create that program and putting budgets together, we just thought it was going to be a hit with our local cities and counties, that they would say, oh, great, we can't wait to have this kind of assistance. And then when we started meeting with the mayors and the county supervisors, The immediate response we got is, well, we're not interested in that. And there were two reasons that they said they weren't interested. The first was they said, we don't want anybody coming from out of town telling us what we ought to be doing. That was number one. And number two, they said, a lot of these people are going to require six-figure salaries to get them down here, and nobody's going to make more than the mayor, or nobody's going to make more than the supervisor who gets paid, $45,000 a year. We're just not going to allow that to happen. And so, that was yet another good idea that kind of ended up in the trash. And I look back on that all the time, and I always sort of view that as the first opportunity that we really had for a lot of the cities and counties to chart themselves a vision. And I don't mean just the charrette process whereby, they're putting together pretty plans and booklets and showing the people. I'm talking about, people that could come in, real expertise that could come in and help these decision makers chart a course forward. And most of it was, we're not interested. And I don't say that to be critical. I just say that as, it's reality. It happened. And I think we continue to pay the price for that kind of thinking. You look around the country at the regions that are very successful economically, the places that have they're really seen incredible business and economic growth. These places, Ricky, have not always been that way. Nashville, Tennessee, which has been one of the strongest economies in the United States, really for the past decade. 30 years ago, there was talk really throughout the country that Nashville was going to be the first great American city that was going to go under. They were bankrupt. They didn't know what to do. They were losing people left and right. And they have completely turned that around. Part of the way that they accomplished that was bringing in smart people that were able to help them chart a course for their future. So to go back to your example about that roadmap, I think it's fair to say that individual communities, some have done better than others at trying to figure out where they want to go. And you have seen some communities do really, really well with, kind of their strategic plan. I use Ocean Springs as an example. Ocean Springs has gotten very good at sort of being what they want to be, and they've seen a lot of investment as a result of that. Downtown Gulfport has really gone through quite a renaissance. You're starting to see some of that really starting to happen and pick up in Biloxi now. But for the most part, what we've never really had was a regional roadmap. And in order for us to be successful on a macro level, we can't do it on a community by community basis. We have to look at ourselves as one people, one region, with common infrastructure, with common governance. Ultimately, they're all pulling on the same end of the rope. And at least in the 20 years I've been doing this, I have not ever experienced that yet.
Well, what I personally see, because I had the benefit of having been there before and after Katrina, was publisher of the Sun Herald, wrote a lot about this. I was incredibly frustrated by the lack of capacity to think about how we want to change. And by the way, I got it. By the way, I don't. Again, that's not necessarily criticism. It's just like today, even keeping people focused on a future. If we really had agreement around that, it's hard with storms and algae blooms and BP oil spill and all the pandemic. It's hard because we get, as we've discussed before, you get through that disaster, take a deep breath, and it's hard to refocus. But what I've noticed more recently, and Coast Vue has given me a chance to zero in like I've never done before, is that if you look at what's happening in Moss Point and Pascagoula and Ocean Springs, Gaucher's got a vision for where they want to go, and you've got unparalleled activity in Biloxi and Gulfport. I could just go all the way down the coast. You got a string of mayors now that had very successful careers that have chosen to do public service now, sort of like George Logal did back when he was the mayor of Gulfport. But we're in a different place, I believe, than we were back then. I think the diversity of our region from different cities that make up this incredible region across 3 coast counties is one of our biggest strengths, but it's also a weakness because when I was in Alabama, I had responsibilities for the newspaper in Huntsville. I watch Huntsville. I've talked about it here on the show. I watch Huntsville. When they decided to go to Washington, they brought 100 people, and they were unbelievably focused. They didn't have to wrestle with getting 15 municipalities on the same page. They had one, and they went, and so that unified voice, it's it's certainly easier to find what the unified voice is going to be. It's certainly easier to understand strategically where the opportunities and how we're going to address those. It's harder here. We have to see that our diversity is our strength, but we also have to figure out as a region, how do we somehow connect all that and integrate it together into a vision that makes sense? Roland Weeks said to me early in my career, and I still believe it today, that in the early days, that if we were spending so much time fighting amongst ourselves, Biloxi and Gulfport weren't even on the same wavelength in back many years ago. Today, Fofo and Billy are leaders in the concept of one coast. But the bottom line was we spent so much time fighting amongst ourselves that the legislature didn't have to pay attention to us. We're in a different place today than we were back in those days. We still have to think about what's the process that we're going to engage leaders in that's going to help us get to where we need to go. Because we don't have that, I think that's one of the reasons why the BP oil money, the Gulf Coast Restoration Fund that you're very involved in, has not been able to really raise the bar on transformation. And one of this is just to remind people, one of the reasons is the legislation created an advisory committee. And they're only in an advisory role. Ashley's deeply involved in that, and they score the projects, and the projects then go to the legislature to get passed. But you don't have to for your project to get passed. You don't necessarily have to go to the local committee. So politics has really gotten involved. I call it a political football. When you look at the projects that have been funded, like municipal buildings and things like that, that's not confirmation. That's not transformation. That is spending money on a project that could have found money in other places. They could have done it in a different way. What I'm talking about transformation is reaching out to a private developer and say, you may not be able to make that project go in Nashville, but bring it to Biloxi, bring it to Gulfport, and we're going to put some Coast Restoration Fund money with it, and we're going to make the numbers work for you here. We have an unparalleled opportunity over the next 14, 15 years still to get this right and to focus on transformation. When we come back, Ashley, I want to hear a little bit of a report. How has it gone? How much of the money is being spent? What's the latest as it relates to the BP money? We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. Now, look, here's the deal. When you talk about BP money or the Gulf Coast Restoration Fund, a lot of that is inside baseball. It's happening over there. The average person doesn't have to pay attention to it. But let me tell you this: Ben Brown, who's one of the top planners in the country, said that he said this on Coast Vue over a year ago. He said that if developers knew that we had a fund here in Mississippi, it's not taxpayer money, incidentally. This is money that BP put into this fund. If developers knew that we had a process in place that gave us a chance to maybe make projects work that won't work in other communities, but they would work here because the public sector is willing to put some skin in the game, man, we would be overrun by developers. But the truth is, we really haven't done any kind of come join us kind of proclamation, because unfortunately too much of the BP money is being used as kind of a political football. That's the reality of it. Okay, that's my statement, not Ashley's. But Ashley, let me ask you specifically, if you go back and look at sort of where we are now, how much money's been allocated and on what kind of projects, and how much of it's actually been spent?
Yeah, so just about all the money that has been available has been allocated. That comes out to roughly $30 million a year for the last 3 years, and then there was some money that was sort of already in that fund from the years that BP had sent that check. BP essentially is sending a $40 million check a year to the state of Mississippi to pay this. And again, as you said, it's a settlement. It's not something that's being derived directly from our tax payments to the state. It's a settlement. It's corporate money that's ultimately going into the state treasury to be spent by the state. Let me take a few steps back and just say, Ricky, we started talking about how best to create a structure for spending this BP money really back in like 2015, 2016 timeframe. So, that's been, a good 7 years that we've been talking about this now. It wasn't until the end of 2018 that we had a special session that created the authorizing legislation. And then in 2019, the process kind of started in earnest. So we've been through this for, three years now. When I say we, I mean the coast has been through this for 3 years now. And essentially what we've got is we've got a grant program that looks a lot like other grant programs that we've had, after disasters like Katrina, whereas, cities, counties, nonprofits, school districts, others are submitting applications. And they're saying through their application, here's our project, here's what we want to do, here's how much it's going to cost, and will you give this money to us to do this? I serve on the advisory board. We're advisory only. We don't make any of those decisions. All we do every year is take the 100 or so applications we receive, dive into it, try to understand the project, try to understand the proposed economic impact, try to understand what are the outcomes going to look like. Is it going to create jobs? Is it going to grow a tax base? Is it going to create land for new development? Is it going to improve a roadway? I mean, what is it going to do? And then we make our recommendations to the legislature based on our review of those applications. And there's 7 people that are on that advisory board, all very distinguished, accomplished, competent business leaders who have spent many years working in the community. We have CFOs, auditors, people who've worked in economic development, folks who have, Jim Simpson, who is a former legislator, bank presidents. I mean, you name it. And in every one of those cases, what we've seen is that, essentially we go through this long process, and that's really where it stops. When the decision comes to the legislature, and they, through the legislation, ensured that they would be the ones to determine how those dollars would be spent. And let me just say on that topic, Ricky, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, they were elected to, by the people of their districts to help make those decisions. But, where we started with this process in the business community was recommending a structure that would act like a board of trustees or a board of fiduciaries, such that they had a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that they would achieve economic outcomes and return on investment through the expenditures of these BP funds, ultimately that were given to us to try to, put our economy back in a good situation. We looked at that from the perspective of why not have funds where we can do low interest or no interest loans for entrepreneurs, so that we can we can get the money paid back over time. Why not be able to take equity positions in projects so that a $10 million investment can mean $20 million coming back into the fund, and then 50 years from now, that initial $500 million or so dollars, or $450 million that we had, might be $1 billion sitting in a fund somewhere that will be constantly reinvested in the coast. Legislature didn't like that idea. They didn't want to go in that direction. They wanted to make annual appropriations of this money. And so they've been doing that every year for the past 3 years, making annual appropriations. Over $100 million appropriated thus far. Only about 2% of that has actually gone out the door and actually hit the streets in terms of being spent. And there are lots of reasons for that as well. But I think without being critical of the process, I think even the legislature would probably say that they have not seen the outcomes that they hope to see as a result of this. So I think we're sitting here, 3 years later, whether you're in the business community or whether you're a local official, or whether you're a state elected official or legislator saying, this has not quite turned out the way we had hoped.
So my read on it is the Coast Legislative Delegation has used this as a way to sort of parcel out the money, so that a little bit goes over there and a little bit goes over here and a little bit goes over there. And you start looking at what some of this money is for. One might be a fund that just for economic development without any other explainers than that. What is that? One might be over here to build a building. One might, you get what I'm trying to say here.
Sure.
And what I said is, okay, if I were a legislator, I might be doing that too if I wasn't being required to sign up for a larger goal here, which is to define and to doggedly work hard to define what the legislation's intention was. The legislative intention was to build transformational projects, to build projects that would have payback for many years to come. You've had many of those that have been approved, and for whatever reason, the money hasn't been drawn down now. But to say that of all the money that's been given, nearly $100 million, and so little of it has actually been paid out yet, it makes you wonder how many of the projects that some went through the committee, but some went around the committee, were not really shovel ready. And they really weren't sure what they were going to do with the money. What's your thought about that?
Well, there's no question. I think, what you see primarily being funded through this process, it's been municipal or county projects. And, with that in mind, there is just the amount of time it takes for some of those things to occur, going through public bid process, public procurement for engineers, all the types of things. So, you're right, not really shovel-ready projects. And so there's just some time kind of built into that process there. Look, this is not the way that you would do economic development. We've talked about this as a quote-unquote economic development fund. Nobody in their right mind would do economic development through an annual appropriation process. Projects don't wait. Economic development projects move fast. They may make an entire location decision within a 3-month time frame and be under construction before the legislature even meets again. So, that's a tough process to do economic development. So what we've really been doing is more community development. I would say that a lot of the projects have been more community development oriented. And with that in mind, what you've seen is, again, and you made this comment. I almost feel like I got to be cautious because I have been often accused of being too hard on the legislators, and I just really want to be very pragmatic about it. When you're elected as a legislator, your job is to go to Jackson and do everything you can to make sure that you bring back the most resources, the most assistance, the most visibility on your district and the things that need to happen in your district. And so in some ways, we've got some misaligned incentives with a program that really should not be designed to make sure everybody gets a small slice of the pie. What we really want to be doing here is making sure that we are investing in investments that will pay dividends over a long period of time, such that the pie grows for everybody. But it's being treated like, well, hey, we've got $30 million this year. Let's figure out a way to make sure that everybody gets a little something out of this. And ultimately, when you do that, those little somethings usually are not going to be very transformational.
I will say this: if I were a local legislator and I was in this position and I wasn't being encouraged or forced by virtue of the legislation or some other pressure on me, I would be trying to figure out how I could use this money as a political football myself. It's kind of natural that it be like that. So, and I said that, not you. I get what you're saying, and you're not. Neither one of us are being overly critical. We kind of set that aside for a second and realize that we got about 13 or 14 more years to go on this BP money, and we should be spending all of our energy trying to figure out how we can be transformational. Let's don't blow this. Let's don't blow this. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. We have all this money sitting there, and that came as a result of BP. The coast is an economic engine for the rest of the state. We were economically damaged during the oil spill. And so the effort should be, what can we put in place that makes us more resilient next time economically? What is it that can be put in place that's going to have a payback for many years to come, that diversifies our economy, that makes us, less reliant on specific segments? What is it we can do? And that's transformational. And we should be focused on that. And we should bring the light of day on every project that they're funding, and ask the community, is that transformational? Let's read this bill again. What does the bill say? The bill literally is talking about long-term payback, saying all the right things, but the mechanism that is deploying the money doesn't necessarily connect well with the transformation. Now, what I've said is, if you really want to improve transformation, then force every single project to come through the committee, so that if you want to improve transformation, then you can improve the scoring so that everything's being scored on the same template. Secondly, if you have a project, like you pointed out, a lot of projects don't fit the legislative calendar, and you need to know now whether you can put some money toward a project or not. We need to build in some kind of a fallback plan for a big opportunity comes from and is involved. How do we get some committed money to be able to do it? It's got to be some discretionary money in this somehow. There's so much about it. But Ashley, so people can have a better understanding, what are a couple of examples of transformational projects that have been funded or may be funded?
Well, we've been fortunate, I think, to get a few what I would consider to be very good projects that have come through this application process. One of the first ones that I got pretty excited about was the Ocean Enterprise project that was really sort of headlined by the University of Southern Mississippi, the Port of Gulfport, City of Gulfport, very supportive. And what it sought to do was to try to create a cluster in downtown Gulfport around the port of ocean science, ocean technology-based companies, services, activities that would ultimately be able to do things like attract other private investment, which they have. Ocean Aero, which is a ocean technology company doing unmanned underwater vehicles. They have located from San Diego, California, down to the Port of Gulfport, which is a great. I was talking to that company back when I was an economic developer 7-8 years ago. So you're starting to see some of that pay off, and that was one of the projects that came in early on. Now, it didn't get funded to nearly the level of request that they had put in, and one of the reasons for that is because there was only so much money to go around, and they wanted to split it up and make sure everybody got a little slice of that. So, but they did get some funding. I think that's a good example of a transformational project. On a smaller scale, I think there are communities that have made application for projects that they think will be transformational, and I agree. Transformational is a lot different in Diamond Head than it is in D'Iberville. When you look at D'Iberville with the incredible retail and commercial corridor they have, City of Diamond Head wanted to go in and expand their commercial district and actually create places that could bring in new retail businesses, new commercial businesses, allow for folks that are getting off the interstate there to be able to go in and stop in Diamond Head, shop, spend money there. That's probably going to be transformational for that city. It was a relatively small project in the grand scheme of things, but that was a project that was awarded. Pascagoula is doing some downtown revitalization. You're seeing some of that in Ocean Springs. So that's not to say that everything that has occurred have not been good projects. There have certainly been good projects in there. But then you contrast that with things like building a new police station in Hancock County, or doing a renovation on the cafeteria at the George County Hospital. Those things, it's difficult to see how those things are really going to ultimately transform the economy. That's not to say those things aren't needs. It's not to say that those things were not in need of capital investment. But as with everything, there's kind of a layer cake to government funding. It's take the money that's the most flexible that can be used on anything and save it for those things that don't fit well into any of the other pots. And that's the thing that one of the big criticisms I have really of the process is, we've got a lot of different funding streams out there, especially as a result of the pandemic. You've got the BP money that is coming through the federal government in the terms of the Restore Act, a lot of environmental restoration money. We got transportation and infrastructure money coming in through the federal government. We get ARPA funds coming in. We've still got Katrina recovery funds that haven't even been fully spent yet. So there are a number of different pots out there, but what gets me is when we're spending these one-time corporate dollars from BP on things that would do environmental restoration or things that would do transportation when we've got other dedicated funds to do those things. So in many ways, it's become a little bit of a kind of a bit of a catch-all, and I don't know that that was ever really the way it was intended.
I think we need to engage the leadership, both the House, the Speaker of the House, and the Lieutenant Governor around this conversation, and see what we can do to make it better. The mixed-use project in downtown Gulfport that could be revolutionary in terms of building a place where people want to live, work, and play. That's another good example of a project that should be and may be funded in the future. There's a lot more to this, but we will not stop having this conversation, because if we're going to raise the bar in coastal Mississippi, we got to get aligned around things like this, and we're not aligned around this one at all, in my opinion. So anyway, with all that behind us, I look forward to continuing the conversations with you, my friend Ashley.
Thank you, Ricky. Always glad to be on your show, and thank you for all the work you do. It's really, really very necessary, and appreciate you very much.
You bet, buddy. Take care. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.